The train car smelled of coal smoke and unwashed men. Cora Ellen Hale pressed herself against the wooden wall, trying to make her tall frame smaller, though she knew it was impossible. At nearly 6 feet in her worn boots, she towered over most women and stood eye to eye with many men, a fact that had brought her nothing but grief in the 23 years of her life. The Union Pacific locomotive wheezed and rattled as it climbed through the mountain passes, each lurch sending her shoulder into the grimy window. Outside, snow-dusted pines blurred past in the gathering dusk of late November. She'd paid for a ticket to anywhere west, anywhere that wasn't Ohio, anywhere that wasn't filled with whispers about the woman who was built like a plow horse and too sturdy for a proper wife. She should have known better than to board the last car. The conductor had warned her, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Miss, that car's mostly full of railroad workers heading to the camps. Might be better if you—" "I'll manage," she'd said, lifting her chin in that way that made her seem even taller. Pride. It had always been her failing. Now, 3 hours into the journey, she understood his warning. The car held 15 men, all rough laborers who'd been drinking since the train left Cheyenne. Their voices grew louder with each mile, their jokes cruder. At first, they'd merely stared long, uncomfortable looks that made her pull her threadbare shawl tighter around her broad shoulders. But as the whiskey bottles passed from hand to hand, stares became comments. "Well, look at that," slurred a man with tobacco-stained teeth. "They're making women bigger these days." "Big enough to pull a plow herself," another laughed, and the sound was sharp as breaking glass. Cora kept her eyes on her folded hands. She'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. In Millbrook, when she'd stood up to Marcus Gideon after he'd spread those rumors about her, it had only given people more to talk about. "Unnatural," they'd whispered. "What kind of woman has fists like that?" The train swayed around a curve, and one of the men younger than the rest, with a patchy beard, stumbled into the aisle beside her bench. The reek of cheap whiskey rolled off him in waves. "You traveling alone?" His words came out sideways, fumbling over each other. She didn't answer, just shifted closer to the window. The glass was cold against her cheek. "Hey." His hand dropped onto the bench back, inches from her shoulder. "I'm talking to you." "Please leave me be." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Leave her be." He looked back at his companions, playing to his audience. "Boys, I think this one thinks she's too good for us." The laughter that followed made her stomach clench. She'd heard that kind of laughter before in the church social hall when William Hartley had loudly announced he couldn't marry her after all, that he needed a woman who looked like a woman, not a draft horse. The memory still burned. More men stood now, forming a loose semicircle around her bench. The car felt smaller, the air thicker. One of them older, with arms like tree trunks, leaned against the seat across the aisle. "You know, miss, it ain't safe for a woman to travel alone. All sorts of dangers on the frontier." His smile showed too many teeth. "Lucky you got us to look after you." "I don't need looking after." The words came out before she could stop them. Wrong thing to say. Their faces changed, humor curdling into something darker. "Hear that? Boys, she doesn't need us." The older man straightened, cracking his knuckles. "Maybe we should show her why she's wrong." The young one with the patchy beard reached for her arm. Cora jerked back, but there was nowhere to go. The window glass pressed cold against her spine. "Don't touch me." This time her voice cracked. "Or what?" He grabbed her wrist, fingers digging in. "You'll fight us, big girl, like you probably think she can." She tried to pull free, but 2 more had moved closer. Panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. The conductor was 3 cars away. The next station was still 40 miles through the mountains. No one would hear her if she screamed. But she screamed anyway. "Help, someone help me." They laughed. The one holding her wrist yanked her to her feet, and she stumbled, her height making her clumsy in the narrow space. "No one's coming, sweetheart. This is the last car. Might as well settle down and be friendly-like. She swung with her free hand, catching someone in the jaw. Pain shot through her knuckles, but there was satisfaction in the grunt of surprise. Then hands were everywhere, grabbing her arms, her shoulders, pushing her back against the wall. Feisty one. Hold her still. The train screamed, no, that was the brakes. The locomotive lurched, throwing everyone sideways. Men cursed as they stumbled. The one holding her wrist let go to catch himself, and Cora pressed back against the window, breathing hard. Outside, through the fogged glass, she glimpsed yellow lamplight. A station here. They weren't supposed to stop for another 2 hours. The train shuddered to a halt with a final metallic shriek. Through the chaos of men trying to regain their footing, she heard it, the sharp whistle of wind through the door at the front of the car. Someone had opened it. Boot steps, slow, measured, each one ringing against the floor like a church bell. The men turned, and through the gap between their shoulders, Cora saw him. He filled the doorway like a piece of the mountain had broken off and walked inside. Taller even than her, with shoulders that strained his elk-hide coat. Snow dusted the broad brim of his hat, and underneath, eyes the color of winter storms took in the scene with one slow sweep. Evening, he said, and his voice was low as distant thunder. The car went still, even drunk. The railroad workers recognized something dangerous when it walked in. This wasn't another laborer or passenger. This was something else entirely, something that belonged to the wild places outside the train windows. The man with tree-trunk arms found his courage first. This ain't your business, stranger. Move along. The newcomer stepped further into the car, and Cora noticed the way his coat fell open to show the colt at his hip. Not threatening, just there, like breathing. See, that's where you're wrong. He pulled off his gloves with deliberate slowness, tucking them into his belt. When I hear a woman calling for help, that makes it my business. She wasn't calling for you. No. Those storm-colored eyes found hers across the car, and something in them made her breath catch. Were you calling for them, Miss? No. The word came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat, tried again. No, I wasn't. He nodded once, then looked back at the men. Thought so. Now, you boys want to step aside. It wasn't a question. The young one with the patchy beard, full of whiskey courage, puffed up his chest. There's 15 of us and one of you, Cowboy. The stranger smiled then, and it was winter wind over granite. That's true. Question is, which one of you wants to be first? The silence stretched like taffy. Then, one by one, the men began to shift aside. They were drunk, not stupid. Something about the way the stranger stood perfectly balanced. Hands loose at his sides suggested this wouldn't be his first fight, or his 10th. He walked through them like they were smoke, never taking his eyes off Cora. When he reached her, he touched the brim of his hat. Ma'am, you hurt. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Her wrist throbbed where the man had grabbed it, but she wouldn't say so. Not here. Good. He turned slightly, addressing the car but keeping her in his peripheral vision. This is Larkspur Hollow. The lady's getting off here. She didn't buy a ticket for... The stranger's look cut off the protest. I said, she's getting off here. He offered his arm. Cora stared at it for a moment. When was the last time anyone had offered her their arm like she was a proper lady, then took it? Her fingers shook against the elk hide. They walked back through the car, the men pressing against the walls to let them pass. At the door, the stranger paused, looked back. Train'll be moving on in 10 minutes. Any of you who follow us off won't be getting back on. That's not a threat, gentlemen. That's a promise. Then they were outside, and the cold mountain air hit Cora's face like a blessing. Her knees buckled. The stranger caught her easily, steadying her with one strong arm. Easy now. You're safe. Safe. She wanted to laugh, or cry. Maybe both. When had she ever been safe? The platform was barely more than a wooden walkway and a small station house. Yellow lamplight spilling from its windows. Mountains rose on all sides, black shapes against the purple sky. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes. She realized she was still clutching his arm and let go quickly. "I thank you. I don't thank you." He studied her face in the lamplight, and she waited for the comment about her height, her size, the inevitable moment when he'd realize what kind of woman he'd rescued. Instead, he said, "When's the last time you ate?" The question was so unexpected she answered honestly. "Yesterday, maybe." He nodded like he'd expected that. "Come on, let's get you inside where it's warm." "I can't. I don't have money for—" "I didn't ask if you had money." He started walking toward the station house, then paused when she didn't follow. "You coming, or you planning to stand out here until you freeze?" She followed. What else could she do? Behind them, the train whistle shrieked. Through the station house window, she watched it pull away, carrying the men and their grabbing hands and cruel laughter into the night. She shivered. "You're all right," the stranger said quietly. "They're gone." She looked up at him, which so rarely happened, and wondered who this man was who'd stepped out of the winter night to save her. His face was weathered but not old, maybe 35 to her 23. Strong jaw, straight nose, and those eyes that seemed to see too much. "Why?" she asked. He understood without explanation. Because nobody else was going to. Simple as that. Because nobody else was going to. For the first time in years. Cora Ellen Hale felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not in front of this stranger who smelled like pine sap and leather and safety. "My name's Cora," she offered. He touched his hat brim again. "Silas McCade. Welcome to Larkspur Hollow, Miss Cora." And despite everything, despite having no money, no place to go, no idea what came next, Cora found herself almost believing she was. The distant whistle hadn't even finished echoing through the canyon when Silas McCade first heard the scream. He'd been checking the trap lines along Elk Creek, his horse picking careful steps through the fresh snow. The November storm had rolled in fast, earlier than expected, and he wanted to clear the traps before they got buried. That's when the Union Pacific rounded the bend below, black smoke streaming against the white mountainside. He almost ignored it. Trains came through twice a week, carrying supplies and workers to the mining camps further west. Nothing to do with him. Then came the sound high and desperate, barely audible over the engine's roar. A woman's voice. Silas pulled up sharp, his gelding dancing beneath him. Could have been his imagination. Wind played tricks in these passes, made you hear things that weren't there. But something cold settled in his gut. The same feeling he'd had right before finding those travelers frozen in Bowers Pass last winter. The scream came again. Hell and damnation. He wheeled his horse toward the trail that led down to Larkspur Hollow. No time for the switchbacks. He pointed the gelding straight down the slope. They plunged through snowdrifts and deadfall, the horse's hooves skidding on hidden rocks. Branches whipped at his face, tore at his coat. Behind them, small avalanches of snow cascaded down the mountainside. The train was already slowing as they burst from the tree line onto the flat beside the tracks. Old Sam, the station master, must have seen his signal. Silas had fired 3 shots into the air as he rode. The emergency signal they'd established years ago. Larkspur Hollow wasn't a scheduled stop, but Sam had the authority to halt trains in emergencies. Silas didn't wait for it to stop completely. As the locomotive groaned past the platform, he spurred his horse alongside the moving cars. The gelding, trained for working cattle, matched the train's speed without hesitation. Silas stood in the stirrups, grabbed the railing of the last car, and swung himself aboard. The door was already cracked open. Passengers sometimes stepped out for air. Despite regulations, he shouldered through it and into chaos. The scene hit him all at once. 15, maybe 20 men, all drunk or getting there. The smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke thick enough to cut. And in the middle of it, backed against the far window. The woman was tall. That registered first, even through the anger that flared hot in his chest. Tall and trying to make herself small, which never worked. He knew because he'd tried it himself as a gangly kid, before he'd learned that shrinking just made the bullies push harder. One man had her wrist, others pressed close, laughing at something probably their own cruelty. The woman's face was white as the snow outside, but her jaw was set firm. Fighter, he thought. Good. She'd need to be. Evening. The word dropped into the car like a stone into still water. Every head turned. Silas took his time stepping fully inside, letting them get a good look. 6'4" in his boots, shoulders broad from years of axe work. And most importantly, not drunk. He'd learned long ago that violence was a tool like any other. Sometimes you needed it. Sometimes you just needed people to think you would. The man holding the woman's wrist tree-trunk arms. Lager maybe tried to stake his claim. "This ain't your business, stranger. Move along." Silas pulled off his gloves with deliberate care. It was theater. But theater worked on drunk men, made them think, made them wonder what those hands had done that required such careful handling. See, that's where you're wrong. He tucked the gloves into his belt, let his coat fall open enough to show the colt. Not a threat, just a fact, like mentioning the weather. When I hear a woman calling for help, that makes it my business. She wasn't calling for you. Now he looked at her properly, past the fear. He saw strength in the set of her shoulders, intelligence in eyes that tracked every movement in the car. She'd been calculating odds, looking for exits. Smart. "Were you calling for them, Miss—" "No." Her voice came out rough, and she cleared her throat. "No, I wasn't." "Thought so. Now, you boys want to step aside." The young one, barely old enough to shave, decided to be brave. "There's 15 of us and one of you. Cowboy." Silas smiled. He'd perfected that smile in a dozen mining camps and railroad towns. It was the smile of a man who'd survived things that had killed better men and found them mildly amusing. "That's true. Question is, which one of you wants to be first?" The mathematics of violence were simple. 15 drunk men in a narrow space, half of them swaying on their feet. They'd get in each other's way, trip over benches, bottle themselves up in the aisle. He'd have to put down maybe 3 before the rest reconsidered their options. The logger would be first, he had that look. Then the young one, because wounded pride was dangerous. After that. But he wouldn't need an after that. They were already moving aside. He walked through them like Moses through the Red Sea, keeping his eyes on the woman, up close. She was even taller than he'd thought, maybe 5'11". It stirred something in him, a memory of being 12 years old and towering over everyone, hunching his shoulders to fit in doorways, wishing he could disappear. "Ma'am, you hurt?" She shook her head quickly. Lying, probably. He'd seen the way that logger had gripped her wrist, but this wasn't the place to push. "Good." He turned slightly, keeping her in sight while addressing the car. "This is Larkspur Hollow. The lady's getting off here." Someone started to protest about tickets. Silas gave him a look that suggested discussing train fare would be detrimental to his dental health. The protest died unborn. He offered his arm. Old-fashioned, his mother would have said. But sometimes old-fashioned was what people needed. A reminder that civility existed, even out here where the mountains scraped the sky raw. She stared at his arm like it might bite, then took it. Her fingers trembled against his coat sleeve, but her grip was firm. They walked through the car together, the men flattening themselves against the walls. At the door, Silas turned back. "Train'll be moving on in 10 minutes. Any of you who follow us off won't be getting back on. That's not a threat. Gentlemen, that's a promise." The cold air outside was sharp as broken glass. The woman swayed, and he caught her elbow, steadying her. She was skin and bones under that threadbare coat. When had she last eaten? Where was she going? Why was she alone? Questions for later. Right now, She needed solid ground and walls around her. Easy now. You're safe. Something flickered across her face at that word. Doubt. Maybe. Or just the exhaustion of someone who'd forgotten what safety felt like. He knew that look. Had worn it himself. Years back. Old Sam hurried over from the station house. Lantern swinging. "Silas, what in the—" Lady needed to disembark. Sam, unexpectedly. Sam, bless him, just nodded. 60 years of railroad work had taught him when not to ask questions. "I'll log it proper like. Nobody'll say different." The woman let go of Silas's arm abruptly, swaying slightly. "I thank you. I don't thank you." He studied her in the lamplight. Strong features. Nothing delicate about her. The kind of face that would age well, grow more interesting with time. But right now, she looked hollowed out, running on stubbornness alone. "When's the last time you ate?" She blinked at the question. "Yesterday, maybe." Of course. He'd bet his winter supplies she'd spent her last dollar on that train ticket. Running from something. Or to something. And either way, doing it on an empty stomach. "Come on, let's get you inside where it's warm." "I can't. I don't have money for—" "I didn't ask if you had money." He started toward the station house, then realized she wasn't following. Pride. It'd kill you faster than cold out here. "You coming, or you planning to stand out here until you freeze?" That got her moving. The train shrieked and pulled away, taking its cargo of drunk workers into the night. The woman watched it go with an expression he couldn't read. "You're all right. They're gone." She looked up at him, and that was strange. Having a woman look up at him without craning her neck like she was checking the weather. Why? One word, but it carried weight. Why help her? Why risk his neck for a stranger? Why care? Because nobody else was going to. He saw the moment it hit her. That simple truth. Her eyes went bright with unshed tears that she blinked back fiercely. "Fighter," he thought again. "Good. My name's Cora. Silas McCade. Welcome to Larkspur Hollow, Miss Cora." Inside the station house, Sam had stoked the stove high. The small room was blissfully warm, smelling of coffee and pipe tobacco. Silas guided Cora to a bench near the heat. "Sam, you got any of that stew left from dinner?" "Sure do. Made enough for an army. As usual." Sam disappeared into the back room that served as his quarters. Silas sat across from Cora, giving her space while keeping himself between her and the door. Old habits. She'd shed her thin coat, revealing a dress that had been mended so many times it was more thread than original fabric. Her wrist was already bruising where that bastard had grabbed her. "You running from something or to something?" She looked up sharply, then away. "Does it matter?" "Not particularly, just helps to know which way to watch." That almost got a smile. "From, I suppose, though there wasn't much left to run from." Sam returned with a bowl of stew and a thick slice of bread. The smell made Cora's stomach growl audibly, but she hesitated. "I can't pay—" "Miss Cora." Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know what the worst part about being too tall is?" She blinked at the non sequitur. "What?" "People always expect you to carry more than your share. Figure if you're big, you must be strong. If you're strong, you don't need help." He gestured to the stew. "But everybody needs help sometimes. Even us tall folks." She looked at him for a long moment, this woman who'd probably been carrying too much for too long. Then she picked up the spoon and ate like she meant it. Not dainty, but deliberate. He liked that. Too many people apologized for taking up space. She just took it. While she ate, he considered his options. There was Widow Mavis who ran the boarding house, but she'd want rent money up front. The church might take her in, but Pastor Williams would ask questions Cora might not want to answer. The logging camp was no place for a woman alone. That left his place, which was complicated for its own reasons. "You know anybody in Larkspur Hollow?" he asked. She shook her head. "I was heading further west, California, maybe, somewhere nobody knows me." Running that far takes money. I'll work. I'm not afraid of hard work. I believe it. He did. Those hands had seen labor. But work takes time to find, and winter's coming on hard. You got a plan for tonight? She set down the spoon carefully. I'll figure something out. I always do. Pride again. He understood it, respected it even, but pride made poor shelter in a snowstorm. I've got a cabin about a mile up the mountain, got a separate room used to be for storage, but it's got a stove and a proper door with a lock. He held up a hand as she started to protest. Before you say no, consider this tomorrow. You can decide what comes next. Tonight, you need somewhere safe to sleep. That's all I'm offering. A door you can lock and a night's rest. She studied him with those sharp eyes, calculating risk. Probably a stranger's cabin in the mountains versus a night in the snow. He didn't blame her wariness. Why? She asked again. This time he told her more truth. Because I know what it's like to need to disappear for a while. And because those men on the train that wasn't right, sometimes we got to balance the scales a little. Sam came back, tactfully not listening to their conversation. Snow's picking up. Silas, you'll want to head out soon if you're going up the mountain. Silas stood. Your choice, Miss Cora. But choose quick. Storm's coming. She stood too, and again he felt that strange kinship of altitude. When she spoke, her voice was steady. All right, one night, and I'll work for it, cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. We'll sort that tomorrow. He helped her into her thin coat, pretended not to notice how she shivered. His horse was where he'd left it, patient in the swirling snow. Without asking, he shrugged out of his elk hide coat and held it out. You'll freeze, she protested. I've got the mountain in my blood. You don't take it. She took it, wrapping herself in leather that smelled of pine and wood smoke. The coat was huge on her, but somehow that just made her look more lost. He swung up into the saddle, then offered his hand. Ever ridden double? Once or twice? He pulled her up behind him. She settled awkwardly at first, trying to maintain proper distance, but when they hit the trail and the wind picked up, survival trumped propriety. She pressed close, arms around his waist, face tucked against his back. The mile up to his cabin had never felt so long, or so short. He was aware of every shift of her weight, every tightening of her grip when the horse stumbled. When was the last time anyone had trusted him like this? Even reluctantly. The cabin materialized out of the snow like something from a fairy tale. Nothing fancy, he'd built it himself over 5 years, adding rooms as neat and resources allowed. But it was solid, weather-tight, with real glass windows and a stone chimney already threading smoke into the sky. He'd banked the fire that morning, but coals still glowed. He helped her down, noted how she swayed on her feet, exhaustion catching up now that the immediate danger had passed. Come on, let's get you settled. Inside, he lit lamps while she stood uncertainly by the door. The main room was simple but clean, a kitchen area, table and chairs, a leather armchair by the fireplace. Bookshelves covered one wall, packed with everything from dime novels to Shakespeare. Her eyes lingered on them, surprised. I didn't expect a logger to read. My mother was a schoolteacher, beat the love of books into me early. He opened a door on the far wall. Here's your room. It was small but warm, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and its own small stove already radiating heat. The lock on the door was solid brass, the key waiting in the lock. I'll bring some blankets. You'll find water in the pitcher there. And he stopped. She was crying, not sobbing, just standing there with tears rolling silently down her face, like she'd forgotten how to make noise when she wept. Miss Cora. It's nothing. I'm sorry. It's just... She wiped her face roughly. I can't remember the last time someone was kind without wanting something for it. The words hit him like a physical blow. He knew that feeling, knew it bone deep. Well, he said quietly, tonight you can remember. Lock the door, get some sleep. Word'll still be there in the morning, and it might look a little less dark. He left her there, closed the door between them, heard the lock turn. Good. She was learning to protect herself again. That was the first step back from wherever she'd been. He built up the fire in the main room and settled into his chair with a book he wouldn't read. Outside, the storm howled like it was trying to tear the mountain down, but inside was warm, and somewhere behind that locked door, a woman who'd been failed by the world was finally safe. For tonight, that was enough. Tomorrow, they'd figure out the rest. Cora woke to silence so complete it pressed against her eardrums. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, only that she wasn't in the train car anymore. Wasn't pressed against cold glass with whiskey-sour breath in her face. The room came into focus slowly. Rough-hewn walls, a small window showing nothing but white. The narrow bed beneath her was the softest thing she'd felt in months, with quilts that smelled of cedar and lavender. Someone had made these quilts with careful hands. A mother, perhaps, or a wife. Was Silas McCade married? The thought brought her fully awake. She sat up, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the whisper of snow against glass and the tick of the cooling stove. Gray light filtered through the window dawn, or what passed for it in a storm. She'd slept in her dress, too exhausted and wary to undress. Now she smoothed the wrinkled fabric, finger-combed her dark hair that never would stay pinned properly. In the small mirror above the washstand, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd run out of places to run. The door was still locked. She'd checked it 3 times before finally falling asleep. Now she turned the key slowly, wincing at the click. The main room was empty, but coffee simmered on the stove, and a note lay on the table. Asterisk, Miss Cora. Gone to check the animals. Coffee's hot. Breakfast fixings in the cupboard. Make yourself at home. S.M. Make herself at home, as if she knew what that meant anymore. She poured coffee into a tin mug, wrapped her hands around its warmth. The cabin was solidly built. She'd give him that. No drafts, no rattling windows. Books everywhere, not just on the shelves, but stacked on surfaces, marked with scraps of paper. A man who read like that wasn't what she'd expected from a mountain logger. But then, people rarely were what you expected. William had seemed so kind at first, so charmed by her height. Like a goddess, he'd said. Diana, the huntress. Until his friends started making jokes. And suddenly she was an embarrassment. Too tall to dance with, too broad to look feminine beside. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. She sipped it anyway, exploring the cabin in cautious steps. Everything was sized for someone tall: the table, the chairs, the door frames. She didn't have to duck or squeeze. It felt like wearing clothes that actually fit after years of making do. She found eggs, bacon, biscuits from the day before. Her stomach, awakened by last night's stew, demanded more. She could cook, had cooked for her father until he died. Then for the Hendersons when she'd worked their farm. At least she could repay hospitality with breakfast. She was sliding eggs onto plates when the door opened in a swirl of snow and cold. Silas stamped his boots on the threshold, shaking white from his shoulders like a bear. "You're up." He pulled off his gloves, eyeing the set table with surprise. "And cooking." "I said I'd work for my keep." "So you did." He hung his coat and hat by the door, ran a hand through dark hair peppered with premature silver. "Smells good." They ate in careful silence. Cora kept waiting for him to fill it with questions: who she was, where she'd come from, why she was alone. But he just ate steadily, refilled her coffee without asking, passed the salt before she reached for it. "Storms set in proper," he said finally. "Won't be traveling weather for days." Her fork stilled. Days. She hadn't thought beyond last night, beyond the locked door and the promise of safety. "I can't impose." "Not imposing if you're working." He leaned back, studied her with those storm-gray eyes. "Can you sew?" "Yes." "Cook, obviously, clean." "Of course." Can you read? The question surprised her. Yes, my mother taught school before she married. Something flickered across his face recognition. Maybe? Then you can earn your keep easy enough. I've got mending piled up, correspondence I'm behind on, books that need organizing, room and board for honest work. Fair. More than fair. Too fair. She waited for the catch. Good. He stood, started clearing dishes. Now, Miss Cora, I need to ask you something straight, and I need a straight answer. Here it came. The questions, the judgments, the moment when he'd realize what kind of woman sat at his table. Are you running from the law? She almost laughed. No, nothing like that. From a husband? No. Though William probably told people she'd thrown herself at him. Desperate spinster that she was. I'm not married. Never have been. He nodded, satisfied. Then as far as I'm concerned, your business is your business. You need a place to weather out the storm. I need help with the work. Simple as that. Nothing was ever that simple, but she wanted to believe it could be. He showed her around properly after breakfast. The storage shed where he kept tools and supplies. The small stable with 2 horses and a milk cow. The root cellar dug into the hillside. Everything neat, ordered, but with the slightly neglected air of a man living alone. How long have you been here? She asked, running her hand along a workbench scarred with use. 5 years, give or take. Came out after. He stopped. After I needed to be somewhere else for a while. She recognized the tone, the same one she'd use if someone asked about William, about the church social, about the night she'd stood in her best dress while he told everyone she was unnatural. The town, she ventured. Larkspur Hollow. What's it like? Small, maybe 300 souls, counting the outlying farms. Logging camp to the north, mine to the west. Good people, mostly. They'll be curious about you. A woman alone usually raises questions. That's so. He pulled a leather ledger from a shelf. Which is why, if anyone asks, you're my cousin from back east. Come to help with the house while you're waiting for your fiancé to send for you from California. She stared at him. You'd lie for me. Wouldn't be lying. I've got cousins scattered from here to Kingdom Come. Who's to say you're not one of them? He handed her the ledger. Besides, truth is what we make it out here. Long as you're not hurting anyone, folk tend to mind their own business. The ledger was full of supply lists, calculations, letters half written to buyers in Denver and Cheyenne. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, educated, but there were gaps. Pages where he'd clearly meant to write more and hadn't. I can help with this, she said. I kept books for the Hendersons back in Ohio. Good. My eyes aren't what they were, and lamplight makes it worse. She looked up at him, this tall man with silver threading through his dark hair, though he couldn't be more than 35. Why are you helping me? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you ever feel like you were too much for the place you were in? The words hit like cold water. Every day of my life. Then you know why. He moved to the window, looked out at the falling snow. My mother used to say God makes some people too big for the boxes the world wants to put them in. Not just tall, though that's part of it. Big in spirit, big in heart. The world doesn't always know what to do with people like that. Cora's throat tightened. What happened to her, your mother? Died when I was 17. Consumption. But she lived bigger than anyone I've known, right up to the end. He turned back. You remind me of her a little. Not in looks, but in that way you've got. Like you're apologizing for taking up space you've got every right to. I'm not. But she was. Had been doing it so long she didn't know how to stop. No harm in it. Just seems a shame. Is all. He pulled on his coat. I've got work in the shed. You need anything, just holler. After he left, Cora sat with the ledger, but her mind wouldn't focus on numbers. She thought about William, how he'd made her feel like a circus curiosity, about her father's friends, always joking about needing a ladder to court her, about every dance where she'd stood against the wall. too tall to partner with anyone comfortably. And now here was this man, this stranger, who had books cut into door frames and chairs built for someone who didn't fit, who looked at her height like it was just another fact, like saying she had brown hair or knew her letters. She forced herself to work, organizing papers, transcribing the half-finished letters in her neat hand. But her awareness kept drifting to the window, to the shed where hammer blows rang rhythmically. At noon, she made sandwiches and coffee, carried them through the snow. The shed was warm from the small forge where Silas was mending trap chains. He looked up when she entered, and she realized he'd been lost in the work the way she lost herself in books. "You don't have to wait on me," he said, but accepted the food gratefully. "You don't have to house me, but here we are." That got an almost smile. They ate standing at the workbench, and Cora found herself studying his hands, scarred, capable, but gentle with the delicate chain links. Hands that could have hurt those men on the train but had chosen restraint instead. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded, mouth full of sandwich. "Last night, on the train, would you really have fought all of them?" He swallowed, considered. "If I had to, but fighting's usually the last answer, not the first. Most men back down if you give them room to do it without losing face. And if they don't back down," his eyes met hers, level and honest, "then I do what needs doing. But I've found that people who hurt others for sport are usually cowards underneath. Stand up to them once properly and they fold. You've done it before, stood up to them. Once or twice." He set down his coffee. "You're wondering if you can trust me." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "Smart. You shouldn't trust anyone too quick, especially men who offer help." He went back to his chains. "But for what it's worth, I meant what I said. You're safe here. Lock your door every night if it helps. Keep that kitchen knife close if it makes you feel better. Trust has to be earned, not expected." The honesty of it, the matter-of-fact understanding, undid something in her chest. She'd been holding her breath since leaving Ohio, maybe longer. Now she let it out, slow and careful. "Thank you," she said. "Nothing to thank me for yet. Talk to me after you've sorted that mess of paperwork." She found herself almost smiling as she walked back to the cabin. The snow was still falling, thick and relentless, cutting them off from the world below. But for the first time in months, years, that didn't feel like a trap. The afternoon passed in strange peace. She worked through the correspondence, making neat piles of completed letters, bills to pay, orders to fill. His business was solid contracts with mines for timber, deals with furniture makers in Denver for specialty lumber. But the books showed a man trying to do everything himself, losing money in the gaps where he couldn't keep up. When dark pressed against the windows, she started dinner, found venison in the cold pantry, potatoes and carrots in bins. She was peeling potatoes when he came in, bringing cold and the smell of fresh-cut wood. He stopped in the doorway, watching her work at his table like she belonged there. Something crossed his face too quick to read. "Find everything all right?" "Yes, though your organization system is interesting." "You mean non-existent?" I was being polite. He laughed then, a rusty sound like he didn't use it much. "My mother tried to teach me. Some lessons didn't take." They worked together preparing dinner, moving around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease. He was careful to give her space. She noticed. Never crowded her. Never made her feel cornered. It was deliberate. That carefulness. The consideration of someone who understood what it was like to feel trapped. After dinner, he built up the fire and settled with a book. Cora hesitated, then took the other chair. He'd left a book on the small table, poetry. She saw with surprise. Wordsworth. "You can borrow any of them," he said without looking up. "Books are meant to be read." She opened the volume carefully. Inside the front cover, in fading ink asterisk, "For my son may you always wander lonely as a cloud, but find your daffodils. With love, Mother." She gave that to me the Christmas before she died, he said quietly. Said I'd understand it someday. Do you? Starting to. They read in companionable silence while the storm raged outside. The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, and Cora found herself relaxing in increments, like ice beginning to thaw. When she finally stood to retire, he looked up. Miss Cora, you asked what Larkspur Hollow was like. I should warn you we're supposed to get supplies delivered tomorrow, weather permitting. Tom Garrett usually brings them up. He's harmless, but talks like a magpie. He'll want to know everything about you. And I'm your cousin from back east. Second cousin. I think makes the story easier. Sarah Cora Hale, from Pennsylvania. Ohio, actually. Millbrook. Ohio. Then, waiting for your fiancé, what's his name? She thought quickly. James Thornton. He's establishing himself in Sacramento. Good. Simple's best. He paused. You don't have to talk to Tom at all if you'd rather not. I can send you out to the shed. No. She lifted her chin. I can't hide forever. No, he agreed. But you can hide until you're ready not to. She looked at him then. Really looked. Saw the understanding there. The knowledge of someone who'd hidden too. What were you hiding from? He marked his place in the book, set it aside. The war. Not from fighting, I did my share. From what I became during it. After, takes a while to find your way back to who you were before. Some people never do. Did you? Not back to who I was, but forward to who I could be. That's the best any of us can do, I think. She thought about that as she prepared for bed. Forward to who she could be. Not the woman William had rejected, not the curiosity everyone stared at. Someone new, someone who didn't apologize for her existence. The small mirror showed her face flushed from the fire's warmth. She looked not happy, but not haunted either. Present, here, safe. She turned the key in the lock habit now more than fear. Somewhere in the main room. She heard Silas banking the fire, the quiet sounds of a house settling for the night. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. For the first time since leaving Ohio, Cora Ellen Hale fell asleep without flinching at every noise. And if she dreamed, they were dreams of snow falling soft as forgiveness, covering all the sharp edges of the world in white. The week passed in a strange rhythm of snowfall and silence. Cora found herself settling into the cabin's quiet routine coffee at dawn. Breakfast, when Silas returned from checking his trap lines. Long afternoons of mending and correspondence while he worked in the shed. Evenings by the fire, reading in companionable quiet. It was the 7th night when things shifted. They'd finished dinner rabbit stew she'd stretched with skill learned from lean years, and Silas was adding another log to the fire when he paused, poker in hand. You want to talk about your first night? The question landed soft as snow, but Cora felt it like a weight on her chest. She set down her teacup carefully, watching the firelight dance on its rim. My first night of what? He settled back in his chair, giving her space to breathe. Whatever you need to talk about. First night you felt safe. First night you felt scared. First night you realized the world wasn't built for you. A pause. Or we can talk about the weather. That's fine too. She almost smiled at that. Almost. You're not much for small talk, are you? Never saw the point. Life's too short to dance around what matters. And what makes you think this matters? He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Because you flinch when doors open too fast. Because you test the lock 3 times before bed. Because you look surprised every morning when breakfast passes without questions or judgments. His gray eyes found hers. Because I remember my own first nights. Cora pulled her shawl tighter, though the room was warm. Outside, wind howled through the pines, but inside felt suspended, separate from the world. Which first night do you want to hear about? She asked quietly. Whichever one you need to tell. She thought of all the first nights, The first night after her mother died when she was 12, lying in a bed that felt too big, listening to her father sob in the next room. The first night she realized she'd stopped growing up, but hadn't stopped growing out. Broad shoulders and strong arms that made her look like a farmer's son instead of his daughter. The first night William had kissed her and made her believe someone could want her. The first night he'd told everyone she wasn't. "I was being courted," she began, the words careful as footsteps on ice. His name was William Hartley. His family owned the bank in Millbrook. Silas made a sound that might have been acknowledgement, nothing more. "He was persistent, sent flowers, wrote poems, said my height made me magnificent, like I'd stepped down from Olympus." She laughed, bitter as burnt coffee. "I should have known. Men who talk in poetry are usually lying about something." "Sometimes they're lying to themselves too," Silas offered quietly. "Maybe for 3 months. Though I believed him. He'd take my arm at church socials, introduce me to people with pride instead of apology. Do you know how rare that was to walk into a room on a man's arm and not have him shrink away when people stared? She picked at a loose thread on her skirt, unraveling something that had held too long. "The first night I really felt safe." "That's what you asked." "It was a church dance in September, harvest celebration. William held me close during a waltz, and for once I didn't have to bend down or feel like a giant. He was tall enough that we fit. I thought," her voice caught, "I thought I'd found my place, my person, the one who made the world feel the right size." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Silas waited. He proposed that night, in front of everyone, down on one knee in the middle of the church hall, ring and all. I said yes, of course. What else could I say? Everyone applauded. The other women looked envious instead of pitying for once. I went to bed feeling like my life was finally starting. But something changed. It wasn't a question. He knew the shape of these stories. His friends started making comments. Little jokes at first. "Better reinforce the bed frame. William. Going to need a bigger church door for the wedding." He laughed them off initially. Told me they were jealous. But the jokes kept coming, and his laughter got thinner. She stood abruptly, moved to the window. Snow was still falling, erasing the world in white. Behind her, she heard Silas shift but not rise, giving her room to move, to run if she needed. She appreciated that more than he could know. The first night I felt truly unsafe, not scared, but unsafe in my own skin was 6 weeks later. Another church social. William had been distant, but I thought it was just wedding planning stress. His mother was very particular about things. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. I wore a new dress, blue silk my father had saved for months to buy. It was beautiful. I felt beautiful. "You were beautiful," Silas said quietly. "Are." She turned, surprised. He wasn't looking at her, but at the fire, his face carved in shadows and light. William didn't think so. Not anymore. He'd been drinking, not drunk, but enough to make him mean. When I walked into the hall, he looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. The memory rose sharp as broken glass. William's face, flushed and twisted with something like disgust, the way the room had gone quiet when he spoke. He stood up in front of everyone, said he'd made a mistake, said he'd been bewitched by my unusual proportions, but had come to his senses, said no man should have to look up at his wife, that it was unnatural, against God's design. Her voice had gone flat, reporting facts like winter temperatures, easier that way. He gave quite a speech about how I'd thrown myself at him, desperate as any spinster would be, how he'd felt sorry for me, tried to be charitable, but couldn't go through with such a farce. The ring he'd given me. He asked for it back, right there, in front of everyone. "Did you give it to him?" "I threw it at his feet. Last bit of pride I had. Then I walked out, back straight, chin up, made it all the way home before I fell apart." She returned to her chair, suddenly exhausted, the weight of the telling, of pulling those words out of the dark where she'd buried them. "That was my first night of being truly alone," she continued. "Father was already sick then, died 2 months later. The Hendersons took me on as help, but everyone knew the story. Poor Cora, who'd reached too high, who'd forgotten her place. Even kindness came wrapped in pity." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Tell me about the train." She looked up, startled. "What?" "You've told me about the first night you felt safe, then unsafe. About the night you learned the world could be cruel. But what about the train? What made you get on it?" The question cut to the heart of it. She'd told him the wound, but not the breaking. 3 weeks ago, Marcus Henderson, my employer's son, he cornered me in the barn." Her hands clenched in her lap. "Said he'd been watching me. Said a woman like me should be grateful for any attention. When I pushed him away, he said I was lucky he was even interested. That no decent man would want me, but maybe he could find a use for me anyway." Silas's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I hit him. Broke his nose. I think there was a lot of blood." She laughed shakily. "His mother found us him bleeding and cursing, me standing over him with hay in my hair." She didn't ask what happened, didn't need to, just told me to be gone by morning. "She blamed you. Easier than blaming her son. I took my savings, bought a ticket for the furthest place I could afford, and left. Didn't even pack properly, just ran." She met his eyes. "And you know the rest, how that turned out." The silence stretched between them, full of unspoken things. Finally. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "You asked earlier which first night I wanted to hear about," he said slowly. "But I think the question I should have asked is this. When was the first night you felt like yourself, not safe or scared or alone? Just yourself?" Cora blinked, caught off guard. I don't know." "Think about it." She did. Searched through memories like sorting through fabric remnants, looking for one true piece, and found, to her surprise, an answer. 3 nights ago," she said quietly. "Here, I was mending your shirt, the blue one with the torn shoulder. You were reading aloud from that book of Greek myths, the part about Atalanta. Do you remember?" He nodded. "You read about how she was raised by bears, how she could outrun any man, how she refused to marry anyone who couldn't best her in a race. And when you finished, you said, 'Now there's a woman who knew her worth.' No joke, no judgment, just approval." "She was a hero," Silas said simply. "Why wouldn't I approve?" "Because most people think a woman who runs is running from her duty. A woman who's strong is unfeminine. A woman who's tall is—" She broke off. "Is what?" "Wrong." He stood then, moved to the bookshelf, pulled down a slim volume. "My mother gave me this when I was 15. I was already 6 feet tall and still growing. Kids called me Scarecrow, Beanpole, worse. I hated being tall, hated how I stuck out." He handed her the book, poetry, worn soft with handling. She marked one poem especially. Said when I was ready, I'd understand it. Cora opened to the marked page. "Whitman, Song of Myself." "Read the underlined part," he said softly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I am large. I contain multitudes." "We're not too much. Cora, we're not wrong-sized or wrong-shaped or wrong-hearted. We're just large. And that's exactly as it should be." She clutched the book like an anchor. "I want to believe that. Believing takes practice, like anything else." He returned to his chair. "You asked why I help. Truth is, I recognize something in you that first night. Same thing I see in the mirror some mornings. Someone who's been told they're wrong so many times they started believing it. And you don't believe it anymore. Some days I do, some days I don't, but the don't days are winning." He smiled slightly. "Having company helps. Someone else who doesn't fit in the usual-sized world. They sat quietly for a while, the fire burning low. Finally, Cora spoke again, so soft he had to lean in to hear. The first night I truly felt like myself. I think it was tonight, right now, telling someone the truth and not having them look at me with pity or disgust or anything but understanding. No pity here, he assured her. Just recognition, one tall person to another. Is that all we are tall people finding shelter together? He considered that carefully. For now, maybe that's enough. Safe shelter in a storm. Honest work. Someone to read with by the fire who doesn't make you feel wrong for taking up space. He paused. The rest? Well, first nights are just beginnings. What matters is all the nights that come after. She nodded slowly. He was right. She'd had so many first nights, first fear, first heartbreak, first betrayal. Maybe it was time for different firsts. First acceptance, first friendship, first time she didn't apologize for being exactly who she was. Silas. Thank you for asking, for listening, for not trying to fix it or minimize it or tell me it wasn't that bad. It was that bad, he said seriously. Anyone who says different is selling something. But bad nights end. Cora, even the longest ones. And tomorrow's a new day. With Tom Garrett bringing supplies, she remembered. My debut as your cousin from Ohio. Second cousin. Don't forget the second. Makes it more believable. His eyes glinted with something that might have been mischief. And if Tom gets too nosy, just stand up to your full height. He's about 5'4", tends to get real polite when he has to crane his neck. Despite everything, Cora found herself laughing. Real laughter, not the bitter kind. It felt rusty, unused, but good. I'll remember that. Good. Now get some rest. Tom will be here early if the weather breaks. And he gossips worse than a church quilting circle. You'll need your strength. She stood, still holding Whitman. May I borrow this? It's yours. Mother would have liked knowing it went to someone who needed it. At her door, she turned back. Silas, that first night, on the train, were you really just checking trap lines? He met her gaze steadily. Does it matter? Yes. Then no, I was tracking a cat that's been stalking my horses. Heard the train whistle. Heard something else too. Made a choice to investigate. He shrugged. Best choice I've made in a while? She nodded, understanding more than he'd said. Sometimes the universe put you where you needed to be. Sometimes strangers became shelter. Sometimes first nights led to second chances. Good night, Silas. Good night, Cora. Sleep well. And for the first time in memory, she did. No dreams of church halls or train cars or hands that grabbed. Just deep, peaceful sleep, while snow erased the world outside and made everything new. Tom Garrett arrived with the morning sun, his wagon wheels cutting fresh tracks through virgin snow. From the kitchen window, Cora watched him navigate the narrow track, talking steadily to his mules as if they were old gossips at a church social. That's Tom, Silas said, drying his hands on a cloth. Remember? Second cousin from Ohio, waiting for James Thornton in Sacramento. She smoothed her apron, lifted her chin. I remember. You don't have to speak to him at all if... I know. She turned from the window. But hiding feeds gossip worse than facing it. Something like pride flickered across his features. That's true enough. Just, Tom means well. But he's got the sensitivity of a brick. Don't let him rattle you. The door burst open before she could respond, bringing in cold air, and Tom Garrett a whirlwind of a man despite his small stature, red-faced from cold and excitement. Silas McCade. You dog. Why didn't you tell me you had family visiting? Here I've been promising Martha Stewart I'd introduce her to any new arrivals. And you're keeping secrets. He stopped mid-tirade, eyes landing on Cora. Oh my. Cora straightened to her full height, remembering Silas's advice. Tom's neck craned back and back and back. Tom, meet my cousin Sarah Cora Hale. Cora, Tom Garrett. He runs supplies and gossip in equal measure. Pleasure, Mr. Garrett, she offered her hand, which Tom shook while staring openly. Well, I'll be... You're a tall drink of water, aren't you? Tom, Silas's voice carried warning. No offense, meant just observing. My Martha's going to have a field day. A cousin. You say, from where? Ohio, Cora said calmly. Millbrook. And what brings you to our little mountain paradise? If you don't mind my asking, waiting for my fiancé to establish himself in Sacramento, Silas was kind enough to offer shelter. Fiancé, well, that'll disappoint some folks. Bachelor cowboys were already scarce, and now the most eligible ones got family staying. Tom's eyes sharpened with curiosity. This fiancé got a name? James Thornton. The lie came smooth as butter. He's in lumber. Lumber good business. Lumber. Though between you and me, mining's where the real money is. Now, my brother-in-law's cousin went to California last year, and he was off, spinning tales while Silas and Cora unloaded supplies. She noticed how Silas positioned himself between her and Tom, subtle but protective, not hiding her, but making sure she had space to retreat if needed. Course, Martha's going to insist on meeting you properly. Tom was saying, she runs the boarding house in town, practically runs the whole town if we're being honest. She'll want to throw a tea, introduce you to the other ladies. That's kind, but no buts about it. Martha Stewart's teas are commands, not invitations. Besides, you'll need to know the women folk if you're staying any length of time. They run the important things: church committees, school board. Who gets invited where? He winked conspiratorially. Between you and me, the town council thinks they're in charge, but it's the ladies' auxiliary that really pulls the strings. Despite herself, Cora found Tom's chatter oddly comforting. He talked to her like she was any other newcomer, not a curiosity or an oddity, just a woman who happened to be tall. Now, Silas, I brought that special order you wanted, books from Denver, though Lord knows why you need more. Got enough here to start a library. Man can never have too many books, Silas said mildly, accepting the wrapped package. That's what Martha says about fabric, but I notice she never reads the fabric. Tom chuckled at his own joke. Speaking of which, Miss Hale, Martha wanted me to ask, do you sew? I do. Praise the Lord. We've been desperate since Mrs. Carson's arthritis got bad. Martha's got a whole room of mending piling up. Good wages if you're interested. Silas glanced at her. Cora's helping me with correspondence and accounts. She can do both, can't she, woman of many talents? I'd wager, no offense, Silas, but your letter writing can't take all day. Martha pays well, and it'd give Miss Hale a chance to meet folks properly. Cora considered. Town meant questions, meant scrutiny, but it also meant independence, her own money, a life beyond this safe cabin. I'd be interested in speaking with Mrs. Stewart, she said carefully. Tom beamed. Wonderful, I'll tell her to expect you. Fair warning, though she's got strong opinions and shares them freely. But she's good people. Helped me court my Agnes when her father thought I wasn't worth spit. Tom Garrett, she said. You might be short in stature, but you're tall in character. Course. She also said I talk too much, but nobody's perfect. The morning passed in a blur of unloading. Tom's stories, and careful navigation of questions. He asked about Ohio, cold as blazes in winter, I bet. About James, lucky man, lucky man. About her plans, California's nice, but these mountains grow on you. Through it all, Cora felt the town's judgment hovering just out of reach. Tom would report every detail. By nightfall, all of Larkspur Hollow would know about Silas McCade's tall cousin from Ohio. Well, Tom finally prepared to leave. Wagon emptied and gossip stores filled. "This has been most illuminating. Miss Hale, you tell that fiancé of yours he'd better hurry up. Mountain winters are long, and we've got plenty of bachelor men who won't care that you can reach the top shelf without a ladder." Heat flooded Cora's cheeks, but before she could respond, Silas stepped forward. "Tom, a word." Something in his tone made the smaller man's chatter die. They stepped aside, and Cora couldn't hear what Silas said, but Tom's face went serious, then ashamed. "No harm meant," she heard Tom mumble. "Just making conversation." "Make it elsewhere." Tom returned, contrite. "My apologies. Miss Hale, my Martha says my mouth runs faster than my brain sometimes, most times. Welcome to Larkspur Hollow. I hope you'll be happy here." After he left, trailing promises to arrange the meeting with Martha, Cora found herself shaking, not from fear or anger, but from the sheer effort of being seen, of standing tall while a stranger catalogued her unusual proportions. "You did well," Silas said quietly. "He wasn't unkind, just—" "Tom. Yes, he's a good man, but he's never learned that not every thought needs airing." He paused. "What did you think about the sewing work?" She moved to the window, watching Tom's wagon disappear into the trees. "I need to earn my way. I can't hide here forever." "This isn't hiding. This is choosing when to be seen." "Is there a difference?" "All the difference in the world." He joined her at the window. "But you're right. Town will talk regardless. Better to give them truth mixed with fiction than let them make up stories wholesale." That afternoon, while Silas worked outside, Cora tried to settle her nerves with mending, but her hands shook, and she pricked her finger twice. The third time, she set the shirt aside with a frustrated sigh. What was wrong with her? She'd faced worse than small-town gossip, survived William's public rejection, Marcus Henderson's assault, a train full of grabbing hands. Why did the thought of Tom Garrett's wife and her ladies' auxiliary terrify her more? Because those others had been enemies, a voice whispered. These people might become friends, and friends could hurt you worse than any enemy. She was lost in dark thoughts when Silas returned, carrying an armload of split wood. He took one look at her face and set the wood down carefully. Second thoughts about town. Third and fourth thoughts. She laughed shakily. I've become a coward. No, his voice was firm. Cautious isn't cowardly, and considering what you've been through, caution seems wise. Tom will have told half the town by now. They'll all want to see the giant woman Silas is harboring. Is that what you think you are, a giant? She gestured helplessly at herself. What else would you call me? He moved closer, and she realized he was studying her with those storm-gray eyes. Not the way men usually looked at her, calculating her strangeness, but like he was reading a map to somewhere important. I'd call you striking, strong, substantial in the way mountains are substantial. He paused. My mother used to say some people were built on a different scale. Not wrong, just more. More is not always welcome. No, he agreed, but that's their failing, not yours. The words hung between them, and Cora felt something shift. A loosening of bands she hadn't known were wrapped around her chest. Tell me about your mother, she said. You mention her often. His face softened. Helen McCade, 5'10" in her stockings and never apologized for it. Came west to teach school. Married my father despite everyone saying he wasn't good enough for her. Taught me to read by firelight, to think for myself, to never shrink just because the world preferred smaller packages. She sounds wonderful. She died too young, but lived every moment like it mattered. He smiled slightly. She would have liked you. Would have marched you straight into town and dared anyone to say a word. I'm not brave like that. Aren't you? You got on a train alone, fought off those men, told me your story when keeping silent would have been easier. Seems pretty brave to me. Cora stood, moved to the shelf where she'd placed Whitman's poetry. I don't feel brave. I feel exposed, like everyone can see through me to all the broken parts. Maybe that's what bravery is, being broken and standing anyway. She turned to find him closer than expected, close enough to see the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. "Why do you keep helping me?" she asked. The truth this time. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I see myself in you. The person I was after the war, convinced I was too damaged for normal life. It took someone showing me kindness I didn't think I deserved to start healing. Maybe I'm just passing that along. And if I can't heal, if I stay broken, then you stay broken. Doesn't make you worth less." He moved to tend the fire. Besides, broken things can still be beautiful, still be useful. Sometimes the cracks are what let the light in. That evening, she helped him with the books, and he was patient with her questions about the business. She learned he supplied specialty lumber to craftsmen, wood for instruments, furniture, fine building, work that required an eye for grain and quality, not just quantity. "You could expand," she said, reviewing the numbers. "There's demand you're not meeting." That would mean hiring men, building a proper operation. He shrugged. "I like the quiet." "Or," she said carefully, "you like not having to manage people, not having to be responsible for anyone but yourself." His hand stilled on the ledger. "That sounds like judgment." "No, recognition, one hermit to another." That surprised a laugh out of him. "Fair enough, though I'm not sure hermits are supposed to take in strays." "Is that what I am, a stray? Aren't we all in our way?" They worked until full dark, and Cora found herself reluctant to retire. But tomorrow meant facing her fears, walking into town, letting strangers judge her worth. At her door, she paused. "Silas, would you come with me to town just the first time? If you want, though you might do better without me. Martha Stewart's been trying to marry me off for years. She sees us together. She'll get ideas." "Let her. I have a fiancé, remember?" "James Thornton, the lumberman." He smiled. Poor fellow doesn't know what he's missing. The words warmed her more than they should. She bid him good night and closed her door, but didn't lock it immediately. Stood there, hand on the key, listening to him moving about in the main room. When had she stopped flinching at his footsteps? When had the sound of him become comforting instead of threatening? She turned the key finally, but gently, not locking him out so much as locking herself in. A small difference, but difference nonetheless. Outside her window, snow began falling again. But tomorrow, she thought, she would walk through it, head high, spine straight. Let them whisper, let them stare. She was Cora Ellen Hale, too tall and too strong and too much for the usual-sized world. But she was also Sarah Cora Hale, cousin from Ohio, earning her keep with honest work. Both things could be true. Both women could exist. And maybe, just maybe, both could find their place in Larkspur Hollow. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. Tomorrow would bring questions and stares and whispers, but it would also bring possibility. And that, she decided, was worth standing tall for. The seamstress work at Martha Stewart's boarding house became Cora's gateway into Larkspur Hollow society. 3 mornings a week, she would walk the mile into town, head high despite the stairs, and spend hours in Martha's sunny sewing room, mending everything from miners' torn breeches to ladies' delicate underthings. Martha herself was a force of nature, barely 5 feet tall, but with the presence of someone twice her size. She'd taken one look at Cora, announced, "Good, finally someone who can reach the top shelves," and put her to work. It was in the 2nd week, while Cora was carefully darning a hole in a wedding tablecloth, that Silas began his visits. "Just need this elbow patched," he'd say, producing a shirt with the tiniest tear. Martha would eye him knowingly. That's the third elbow this week. Silas McCade. Either you've taken up wrestling bears or you're finding excuses. Man's got to keep his clothes decent, he'd reply mildly, settling his long frame into the chair by the window where he could watch Cora work. The other women in the sewing circle, for there was always a circle, gossiping as steadily as they stitched, would titter behind their hands. But Cora found his presence steadying. When Mrs. Davidson made pointed comments about some people being too proud to marry local boys, Silas would clear his throat and observe that pride came in many forms, including judging others without cause. It became a pattern. Every few days, another barely worn garment would need mending. Sometimes he'd bring a book, reading quietly while she worked. Sometimes he'd join the conversation, his deep voice a counterpoint to the women's chatter. Always, he positioned himself where his presence reminded others that Cora wasn't alone or friendless. "He's sweet on you," Agnes Garrett declared one afternoon, after Silas had departed with his freshly mended vest. "He's family," Cora reminded her, threading her needle with steady hands. "And I'm engaged. Engaged to a man none of us have seen." Mrs. Davidson sniffed. "Convenient, that." "Eleanor," Martha warned. But Mrs. Davidson, face pinched with the satisfaction of the righteous, continued. "I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. Girl shows up out of nowhere, moves in with our most eligible bachelor, claims to be a cousin but looks nothing like any McCade I've ever seen. That's enough." Martha's voice could have frozen July. "Cora's been nothing but helpful and proper. If you've got accusations to make, Eleanor Davidson, make them plain. Otherwise, hold your tongue or find somewhere else to spread your poison." The room went silent, except for the whisper of thread through fabric. Cora kept her eyes on her work, but her hands trembled slightly. This was what she'd feared, the whispers becoming words, the words becoming weapons. That evening, Silas noticed her mood immediately. Rough day in town. She set down her fork, appetite gone. "Mrs. Davidson thinks that we're..." He leaned back, unsurprised. "Eleanor Davidson thinks everyone's up to something improper. Accused Tom Garrett of watering his horses at her well with criminal intent last year. This is different. She's suggesting..." "I know what she's suggesting." His gray eyes were steady on hers. "Question is, does it matter what Eleanor Davidson thinks? It matters if the whole town believes it. The whole town knows Eleanor's got a mouth meaner than a trapped badger. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "Martha Stewart put her in her place. Didn't she?" Cora looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "Martha sent word. Wanted me to know she'd handled it, and that I'd best come up with better excuses than torn elbows if I was going to keep visiting." Despite everything, Cora felt her lips twitch. "Your shirts are running out of elbows to tear." "I'll have to start on the shoulders next." They shared a moment of quiet humor, but the worry remained. That night, as they read by the fire, Cora found herself watching him over her book, the way lamplight caught in his hair, turning silver to gold, the careful way he turned pages, respectful of the binding, the stillness in him that had become as comforting as walls. When had this arrangement stopped feeling temporary? "You're staring," he said without looking up. Heat flooded her face. "I'm thinking..." "Dangerous pastime." "Silas." She set down her book. "What happens when people don't believe the cousin story anymore? What happens to your reputation?" Now he did look up. "My reputation survived the war, survived me living like a hermit for 5 years, survived my mother being the only woman in 3 counties who'd stand up to the mine bosses. I think it'll survive having a house guest." "Is that all I am, a house guest?" The question hung between them like morning mist, delicate and dangerous. Silas marked his page slowly, set his book aside. "What do you want to be, Cora?" A dozen answers crowded her throat. "Your friend, your partner, your..." She cut off that thought sharply. She'd learned the cost of wanting too much. "I don't know," she said finally. "I've been so many things, daughter. Burden, oddity, target. I don't know how to be just myself." "Then maybe that's where you start. Being yourself. The rest tends to follow." A week later, everything shifted again. Cora was in the sewing room, working on a particularly delicate piece of lacework, when Agnes Garrett burst in, eyes bright with news. "There's a gentleman at the hotel asking after a woman named Cora Hale." The needle slipped, pricking deep. Cora watched blood bead on her finger as if from a great distance. "What gentleman?" Martha asked sharply. "Says his name is William Hartley. Come all the way from Ohio. Tall fellow. Well-dressed. Says he's looking for his fiancée who might be using her middle name. Sarah." The room spun. Cora gripped the table edge, lacework crumpling in her fist. "I need excuse me." She stood too quickly, chair scraping. "Cora," Martha's voice seemed to come from underwater. She made it to the door before the black spots dancing in her vision won, made it 3 steps into the street before her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy." Silas's voice, because of course he'd appeared. He always appeared when she needed him. "I've got you." "He found me." The words came out strangled. "William, I know," Agnes told Tom. "Tom found me." He half carried her to the bench outside the milliner's shop. "Breathe. Just breathe." "I can't see him. I can't." "You don't have to." His hands were steady on her shoulders, grounding her. "Look at me. Cora, look at me." She met his eyes, found storm clouds gathering there. "You don't have to see anyone you don't want to see. Not him, not anyone. You understand." She nodded, gulping air. Around them. She could feel the town watching. Agnes hovering nearby. Martha emerging from the boarding house. Others peering from windows and doorways. All witnessing her unraveling. I need to go back to the cabin." "All right." "People are staring." "Let them." He helped her stand, kept his hand at her elbow. "Can you walk?" She could. Barely. They made it half a block before a voice called out behind them. Cora Ellen, is that you?" She froze, that voice cultured, confident, amused. Everything William Hartley had always been. "Keep walking," Silas murmured. But William was already rounding them, stepping into their path with the easy assurance of a man who'd never been denied anything. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall enough to make most women feel delicate. Handsome in that polished way that photographed well. His eyes skimmed over her, taking in her plain dress, her work-roughened hands. Silas's protective stance. "My God, it really is you. When I heard rumors of a statuesque woman in some mining town, I had to see for myself." His smile was all teeth. "You've led me quite a chase." "Mr. Hartley." Her voice sounded steady. "Somehow, I have nothing to say to you." "Now, is that any way to greet your fiancé?" He stepped closer, and Silas shifted subtly between them. William's eyes narrowed. "And who might this be?" "Someone who thinks the lady asked you to leave her be," Silas said mildly. William laughed. "The lady, oh, that's rich. Cora, what tales have you been spinning? Don't tell me you fooled these people into thinking you're some delicate flower." "That's enough." Silas's voice had gone quiet, dangerous quiet. "Is it? I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm William Hartley, Cora's fiancé, the one she ran away from after causing quite a scene at our engagement party." "Engagement party?" Cora found her voice. "You mean the night you stood up in front of everyone and called me unnatural?" "I was drinking. I misspoke. Surely you can forgive a man's momentary weakness." He reached for her hand, but Silas intercepted. "The lady said she has nothing to say to you." William's face flushed. "Now see here." "No, you see." Silas stepped fully between them now, using every inch of his height. "The lady wants you gone. I want you gone. That makes it unanimous. You can't, she's my fiancée. Was I? Cora stepped around Silas, found her courage in anger. Was I your fiancé when you demanded the ring back in front of everyone? When you said no man should have to look up at his wife? When you told them all I'd thrown myself at you out of desperation? Cora. Miss Hale, she corrected coldly. I am Miss Hale to you, and I am not your anything, not anymore. William's handsome face twisted. You always were too proud, too stubborn. I came all this way to give you another chance. I don't want it. You'd rather stay here in this backwater playing house with, his eyes raked over Silas dismissively, some mountain savage? The crack of Silas's fist against William's jaw was deeply satisfying. William stumbled back, hand to his face, blood trickling between his fingers. You broke my nose. Could have been worse, Silas said conversationally. Could have broken more, still might, if you don't start walking. This is assault. I'll have the law. You do that. Marshal Hendricks had appeared, thumbs hooked in his belt. Course, I saw the whole thing. Saw you accosting Miss Hale, refusing to leave when asked. Man's got a right to defend a lady, especially on her behalf. William looked around, found no sympathy in the gathering crowd. Martha Stewart stood like a tiny general, arms crossed. Tom Garrett had found a pickaxe handle somewhere. Even Eleanor Davidson looked disapproving, though whether at William or the general disorder was unclear. This isn't over, William snarled, dabbing at his nose with a handkerchief. Cora, when you come to your senses— I have come to them, she interrupted. That's why I'm here and not there. Goodbye. William, don't follow me again. He left, eventually, driven to the train station by Marshal Hendricks with strong suggestions about the next eastbound departure. The crowd dispersed slowly, full of whispers and speculation. But Martha Stewart planted herself in front of Cora and Silas like a small mountain. Well, she announced, that was enlightening. Inside. Both of you. Now. They followed meekly to her private parlor, where she poured generous measures of whiskey and demanded the whole truth. Cora told it, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. The courtship, the humiliation, the train. And the cousin story, Martha asked shrewdly. Cora glanced at Silas, who nodded slightly. A fiction. To protect my reputation, I'm not engaged to anyone in California. Thank the Lord for that. Martha downed her whiskey. Right. Here's what's going to happen. That fool from Ohio is going to board tomorrow's train and never darken our doorstep again. You're going to hold your head high and continue your excellent work. And if anyone gives you grief about today, they'll answer to me. Mrs. Stewart. Martha, and don't argue. I know quality when I see it, and you, Cora Hale, are quality. That primped peacock wouldn't know a real woman if she bit him. She refilled their glasses. Though I notice you didn't. Silas, bite him. I mean, just the one punch. You're mellowing. Didn't seem worth the effort, Silas said. Martha's eyes twinkled. Now, about this cousin business. We're handling it, Silas said firmly. I'm sure you are. She stood, all 5 feet of her radiating authority. Cora, I expect you back tomorrow. We've got the Jameson wedding to prepare for, and those tablecloths won't hem themselves. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the mountains, painting everything gold. Cora walked beside Silas in silence until they reached the edge of town. Thank you, she said finally, for defending me, for being there. Always will be, he said simply. The words settled into her chest, warm and solid as hearthstones. She looked up at him, this man who'd given her shelter, who'd stood between her and harm, who brought torn shirts just to sit nearby while she sewed. Silas, I'm not really your cousin. His mouth quirked. Notice that. And I'm not engaged to anyone in California. Notice that, too. What are we going to tell people now? He was quiet for a moment, considering. Then, how about the truth that you're a woman starting over, and I'm a man who understands what that means? The rest is nobody's business but ours. Ours, such a small word to carry so much weight. They walked home through the gathering dusk, and Cora felt something she hadn't expected: relief. William had come, had tried to reclaim her, and she'd said no, in front of witnesses, with backup. She was still too tall, too strong, too much for the usual-sized world. But here in Larkspur Hollow, with Martha Stewart's fierce protection and Silas's quiet strength and her own growing courage, maybe that was exactly right. The cabin appeared through the trees, windows glowing warm with lamplight. Home, she thought, and didn't correct herself. After all, truth was what they made it. And this truth, this life she was building one stitch at a time, felt more real than anything she'd left behind. The accident happened on a Thursday morning in late January, when ice made the mountain paths treacherous, and even experienced loggers knew to move careful as cats. Cora was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, when young Pete Morrison came running up from the logging camp, face white as the snow he'd churned through. "Miss Cora, there's been an accident. Tree came down wrong, Mr. McCade." The words hit like physical blows. She didn't remember grabbing her shawl or following Pete down the mountain. Didn't remember the treacherous slide down icy paths or the way her skirts tangled in underbrush. All she knew was the hammering of her heart and the prayer repeating in her head: asterisk, not him. Please, not him. The logging camp was chaos. Men clustered around something on the ground, voices low and urgent. Tom Garrett was there, hat in his hands, and Marshall Hendricks, and Doc Pearson kneeling in the mud. "Let me through." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Let me see him." The men parted, and there was Silas. So still, so pale. Blood seeped through the bandages someone had wrapped around his ribs. More blood matted his hair. His left leg lay at an angle that made her stomach turn. "He's alive," Doc Pearson said quickly, seeing her face. "But he needs proper tending. We've got to get him somewhere warm and clean." "The cabin," she said immediately. "Bring him to the cabin." "Miss Cora, he'll need constant care." "Then he'll have it?" She knelt beside Silas, took his hand. It was cold, too cold. "Can you hear me? You're going to be all right. I've got you." His eyelids fluttered, and she caught a glimpse of storm gray before they closed again. They made a litter from pine branches and canvas, 6 men carrying him up the mountain while Cora ran ahead to prepare. She built up the fire, heated water, pulled every clean linen from the cupboard. When they arrived, she directed them to his room, no question of making him sleep in the small spare room. Not with injuries like these. Broken ribs, broken leg, possible skull fracture. Doc Pearson cataloged while she helped cut away Silas's ruined clothes. "He's lucky. Tree caught him glancing instead of straight on. Or we'd be building a box instead of setting bones." Lucky. Cora looked at Silas's battered body and wanted to scream, but there was no time for hysterics. She held him steady while Doc Pearson set the leg, bit her lip when Silas groaned through unconsciousness, helped wrap the ribs, clean the gash on his temple, check for other damage. "He'll need watching," Doc Pearson said when it was done. "Fever's likely with injuries like these. Someone should be with him constant for the first few days." "I'll stay," she said. "Miss Cora, it ain't entirely proper." "Proper." She stood to her full height, blood on her apron, fear sharpening into anger. "Was it proper when he pulled me off that train, when he gave me shelter with no questions asked, when he defended me from—" She broke off, breathing hard. "I'm staying." Doc Pearson raised his hands in surrender. "All right, I'll send my wife up to help. Between the two of you, should be manageable." But when Mrs. Pearson arrived, Cora sent her to rest in the spare room. This was her vigil to keep, her debt to pay, though it had stopped feeling like debt weeks ago. She sat beside Silas's bed as darkness fell, wringing cool water from cloths to lay on his burning forehead. The fever had come as predicted, turning his skin furnace hot, making him mutter and toss. She held his hand through the worst of it, talking steadily about nothing, everything, just so he'd know he wasn't alone. "You can't leave," she told him during the darkest part of the night. "Do you hear me? Silas McCade. You don't get to save me and then leave. That's not how this works." He turned toward her voice, though his eyes stayed closed. "Cora, I'm here. Don't get on the train." Her throat tightened, even delirious. He was trying to protect her. "I won't. I'm staying right here." "Good. Safe here. You're safe." By morning, the fever had broken. Though he drifted in and out of consciousness, Martha Stewart arrived with supplies and took one look at Cora hollow-eyed, still wearing yesterday's bloody dress, and took charge. Bath, food, sleep, in that order. "I can't leave him." "You can and will. What good are you to him if you collapse?" Martha steered her firmly to the spare room. "I'll sit with him. Go." Cora bathed, ate without tasting, fell into bed for 3 hours of dreamless sleep. When she woke, Agnes Garrett was in the kitchen making soup. "Martha's orders," Agnes explained. "We're taking shifts so you don't wear yourself to nothing. Tom's already organized the men to handle Silas's contracts. Doc Pearson will check in daily. You just focus on getting him well." The kindness of it, the swift, unquestioning support, made Cora's eyes burn. This was what community meant, what belonging looked like. She returned to Silas's room to find him awake, truly awake, trying to sit up despite Martha's scolding. "You're here," he said when he saw her, and the relief in his voice made her knees weak. "Where else would I be? Thought I dreamed. Thought maybe you'd gone. Lie back down before you undo all Doc Pearson's work." She helped him settle against the pillows, noted the lines of pain around his mouth. "How do you feel?" "Like a tree fell on me." "One did." That would explain it. He caught her hand as she adjusted his blanket. "You stayed. Through all of it." "Of course I stayed." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Not of course. Thank you." The days blurred together after that. Cora learned the rhythms of caretaking, when to push him to eat, when to let him rest, how to read the tension in his shoulders that meant pain he wouldn't admit to. She read to him for hours, everything from newspapers to poetry to the adventure novels he pretended to think silly but secretly loved. "You should be in town," he said one afternoon, watching her darn stockings by the window. "Working, living your life." "I am living my life." "Cora." "No." She set down her mending, looked at him square. "You don't get to decide what I should be doing. Not you, not William, not anyone. I choose to be here. That's my right." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" Such a simple question, such a complicated answer. "Because you saved me. Because you see me as I am. Because the thought of losing you made me understand what I'd already lost my heart. Given without asking, received without demanding." "Because you do the same for me," she said instead. "Yes," he agreed softly. "I would." The weeks of recovery passed slowly. Doc Pearson was pleased with his progress, though he warned about pushing too fast. The broken ribs healed first, then gradually the leg, though Silas chafed at the enforced stillness. "I've got work to do," he grumbled, watching out the window as Tom Garrett and others handled his contracts. "The work will be there when you're healed," Cora pointed out. "The mountain's not going anywhere." "But I am going crazy, specifically." She laughed, and he smiled at the sound. He did that more now smiled when she entered a room, laughed at her observations, watched her with eyes that held something warm and wondering. It was during the 3rd week, when he was finally able to sit in a chair by the fire, that Emily Crawford came to visit. Cora had heard of her, the banker's daughter from Denver who'd visited last Christmas. The beauty, everyone assumed, would eventually win Silas's carefully guarded heart. She swept in like winter sunshine, all golden hair and city polish, carrying a basket of delicacies from Denver.
"Silas, you awful man,"
she scolded prettily.
"How dare you nearly die before I could visit again?"
She was everything Cora wasn't: delicate, refined, the perfect height for a man to protect and cherish. Cora excused herself to the kitchen, but their voices carried.
"I've been so worried,"
Emily was saying.
"Father says you're lucky to have such devoted help during recovery."
"Cora's been more than help," Silas said firmly. "I wouldn't have made it without her. Of course, though I'm sure she's eager to get back to her own life now that you're improving. A woman like that must have plans." Cora didn't wait to hear his response. She grabbed her shawl and escaped to the shed, needing distance, needing air. She'd known this day would come when Silas would remember there were women in the world who didn't tower over others, who fit the expected mold. She was organizing tools with unnecessary force when he found her, leaning heavy on his crutch, face white from the exertion of walking so far. "You shouldn't be out here," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Neither should you. Miss Crawford needs entertaining." Miss Crawford left rather quickly, once I made it clear I wasn't interested in what she was offering. Cora's hand stilled.
"She's beautiful."
"Yes, perfect height, if you like that sort of thing. Most men do." "I'm not most men." He moved closer, awkward with the crutch but determined. "Cora, look at me." She did, reluctantly, and found his storm-gray eyes intense with something that made her breath catch. "Emily Crawford is everything the world says a man should want," he said quietly. "Delicate, demure, decorative. She'd make some man a fine wife, I'm sure, but when I was lying there, thinking I might die, it wasn't Emily I needed to see, it was you, Silas. You who stayed through fever and blood and the ugly parts of healing. You who reads to me and argues with me and makes me laugh even when breathing hurts. You who stands tall and proud and never apologizes for taking up space in my life." Tears burned her eyes. I can't be. Can't be what the woman I've fallen in love with. Too late for that, I'm afraid. The words hung between them like suspended snowflakes. Cora's heart hammered against her ribs. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "You're grateful. That's all. When you're fully healed." "I'll still love you." He reached out, cupped her face with his free hand. "I loved you before the accident. Loved you that first night when you looked at my books like they were treasure. Loved you when you stood up to William. Love you now, covered in dust and angry at me for walking too far." "I'm too tall," she said desperately. "You're perfect height. Too strong. Strong enough to catch me when I fall." "Too much." "Never too much. Never. Cora, you're exactly enough. Exactly right. Exactly what I never knew I was looking for until you fell off that train and into my life." She was crying now, tears sliding hot down her cheeks. "I don't know how to be loved. Not properly. William made sure of that." "Then we'll learn together, because God knows I don't know how to do it right either. But I know I want to try. With you. If you'll have me." She looked at him, this man who'd given her shelter, who'd stood between her and harm, who saw her height as an asset and her strength as beauty, who loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. "Yes," she whispered. His smile was bright as sunrise. "Yes. Yes, I'll have you. Yes to all of it. Yes to learning together and building together and—" He kissed her then, balancing precariously on his crutch, and she held him steady, held him close, held him like the treasure he was. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably heal a bit more before we make this official," he said wryly. "Hard to court a woman properly when I can barely walk." "As if we've done anything properly yet," she pointed out. He laughed, winced, laughed again. "Fair point, but you deserve proper courting. Cora Hale, flowers and poetry and all of it." "I've had poetry." she said, thinking of William's flowery lies.
I'd rather have truth.
Then here's truth. I love you. I'll love you tomorrow and next year and when we're old and gray. I'll love you tall and strong and taking up all the space you need. That's my truth.
And here's mine,
she said, courage filling her like spring water.
I love you too. Have for weeks, maybe from the start.
I love your kindness and your books and the way you make me feel like I fit in this world. I love you. Silas McCade. They stayed there in the dusty shed, holding each other carefully around his injuries, planning a future neither had dared imagine. And when they finally made their slow way back to the cabin, Cora walked tall beside him, no longer afraid of being seen, no longer apologizing for her existence. She was Cora Ellen Hale, too tall, too strong, too much for the usual-sized world, but she was also loved, completely and truly, by a man who saw all of her and wanted nothing changed. And that, she thought as they entered their home together, was exactly the right size for happiness. The church social was Agnes Garrett's idea.
First real gathering since Christmas,
she'd said, eyes bright with meaning.
Everyone will be there.
It was March now, and Silas had healed enough to walk without the crutch, though he still moved carefully. The past weeks had been a gentle courtship, shared meals, evening walks when weather permitted, his hand finding hers with increasing frequency. The town watched with barely concealed interest, waiting for official word of what everyone could already see. We don't have to go, Silas said, watching Cora brush her dark hair before the mirror.
If you're not ready. I'm ready.
She met his eyes in the glass.
Are you?
He crossed to her, placed his hands on her shoulders. To walk into that church beside you, to dance with you in front of everyone, yes. She'd made a new dress for the occasion, deep blue wool that Martha Stewart had helped her cut to flatter her tall frame rather than hide it.
You stand like you mean it,
Martha had said, pinning hems. No more shrinking. You're a woman in love with a man who loves you back. That's worth standing tall for. Now, preparing to face the town as themselves, not cousins, not convenient fiction, but two people choosing each other. Cora felt the old fears creeping back. What if they stared? What if they whispered? What if—
Stop thinking so loud,
Silas murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple.
Whatever happens, we face it together.
The church hall was warm with lamplight and voices when they arrived. Conversations faltered as they entered, every eye tracking their movement. Cora's spine wanted to curve, her shoulders to hunch, but Silas's hand at her back was steady, and she remembered Martha's words. Stand like you mean it. Silas, Miss Cora, Tom Garrett bounded over, Agnes in tow. About time you two showed up. Agnes has been fretting the food would get cold. The food's fine. Agnes swatted her husband. But we did save you seats. Come on, before Eleanor Davidson claims them out of spite. And just like that, the spell broke. People returned to their conversations, though Cora caught plenty of glances. She and Silas found their seats, accepted plates of food, fell into the rhythm of community. It was during the meal that William appeared. He stood in the doorway like a bad penny turned up, wearing the same fine clothes, the same superior expression. The noise in the hall died as if someone had thrown a blanket over it. No, Cora breathed. Silas was already standing, moving to intercept, but William's voice carried clear across the room. I've come to apologize, he announced, as if performing for an audience. Which, Cora realized, William had always needed an audience. To make amends for my behavior, Cora, surely you'll grant me that courtesy. Every eye swung to her. This was the test. Then, not just facing the town, but facing her past in front of them. She stood slowly, aware of her height, aware of the whispers starting. Mr. Hartley, I thought I made myself clear. You did, but I've had time to think, to realize my mistakes. He moved closer, hands spread in supplication. I was wrong. I see that now. You're a remarkable woman, and I was a fool to let pride blind me to it. Pretty words. The kind that had once made her heart race. But Cora heard them for what they were now: performance. Not feeling. William didn't want her. He wanted to win, to prove he could still bend her to his will. "Your apology is noted," she said coolly. "Now please leave."
Cora,
He reached for her hand.
the lady asked you to leave.
Silas had moved beside her, not between them, beside her, because he knew she could handle this herself. William's mask slipped.
This is Rich. You rejected me for this backwoods nobody. You think he really wants you?
A woman like you. His laugh was ugly.
He's using you. Can't you see that for cooking, cleaning, warming his bed?
The crack of Cora's palm against William's cheek echoed through the hall like a gunshot. He staggered, hand to his face, staring at her in shock.
How dare you?
She said, voice low but carrying.
How dare you come here, to our home, and speak such filth? You know nothing about what Silas wants or what I'm worth. You never did. You hit me,
William said stupidly.
Yes, and I'll do it again if you don't leave.
She stepped forward, using every inch of her height. I am not too tall or too strong or too anything. I am exactly right for the man who loves me and the life I've built. You're the one who's too small. William, too small in spirit to see beyond your own prejudices. The room had gone utterly silent. William looked around, seeking support, finding none. Even Eleanor Davidson had pursed her lips in disapproval at him. Not Cora.
This isn't over,
he snarled.
Yes, it is.
Marshal Hendricks stepped forward.
Mr. Hartley, you're disturbing the peace. Again, time to go.
This time, William didn't even make it to the train station. The marshal put him on his horse with clear directions to keep riding and strong suggestions about what would happen if he returned. The church social resumed, though with an electric energy that had nothing to do with the earlier program.
Well,
Martha Stewart said loudly.
I'd say that calls for music. Tom, get your fiddle.
The dancing started hesitantly, couples taking the floor with careful steps. Cora stood frozen, adrenaline still singing in her veins, aware of every eye still sliding her way. Dance with me, Silas said quietly. Everyone's watching.
Let them.
He held out his hand.
Dance with me, Cora. Show them who we are.
She took his hand. The floor cleared slightly as they moved to the center, and Cora understood why. They were a sight both tall, both strong, moving together with careful grace. She'd danced so few times in her life, always awkward, always wrong-heighted for her partner. But not with Silas. With him, she fit, her hand in his, her eyes level with his, their bodies finding rhythm as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. The fiddle sang. Other instruments joined in, and they danced like they were alone in their cabin. Just the two of them and the music. I love you, Silas murmured, quiet enough only she could hear. My brave, beautiful Cora, you were magnificent.
I hit him.
You defended us, our life, our truth. He spun her gently, mindful of his still healing ribs. I'm so proud to stand beside you. Others were dancing now, the floor filling, but space remained around Cora and Silas, not from avoidance. She realized, but from respect, from recognition of something special, something worth protecting. When the music ended, applause broke out. Not polite social applause, but real appreciation. Agnes Garrett was crying. Martha Stewart looked fierce with pride. Even some of the men who'd watched her with suspicion were nodding approval.
Speech, someone called out. Give us a speech, McCade.
Silas looked at Cora, question in his eyes. She nodded. All right, he said, voice carrying. But it's a short one. Most of you know I'm not much for words, but some things need saying. He kept hold of Cora's hand, facing their community. Cora Hale came to Larkspur Hollow as a stranger. You've watched us tell necessary lies to protect her reputation while she found her feet. I'm done with lies. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The truth is simple. I love this woman, not despite her height or her strength or her courage, but because of all of it. She makes me want to be better than I am. She makes our house a home. And if she'll have me, if you'll have me, Cora, I want to marry her, proper and legal and in front of everyone, so there's no doubt where we stand. The hall erupted. Cora heard none of it, focused only on Silas's face, on the question in his storm-gray eyes. Was that a proposal? She managed. Not my best one. I'd planned something more private, with a ring and probably less public speaking. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. But yes, will you marry me? Cora, will you stay and build a life with me? Will you be too tall and too strong and too wonderful with me for all our days?
Yes,
The word came out laughing and crying at once.
yes to all of it. Yes to you.
He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the church social, and the cheers nearly raised the roof, when they broke apart, both breathless. The crowd pressed close with congratulations. About time. Tom Garrett declared, I've been holding bets on when you'd make it official. Agnes said spring. I said summer. Looks like she wins again. You've been betting on us? Cora asked, torn between outrage and amusement. Whole town has, Martha admitted cheerfully. Nothing mean-spirited, mind. We just like seeing good people find each other. Gives the rest of us hope. The evening became a blur of well-wishes, of women admiring her dress and saying they'd help with wedding plans, of men clapping Silas on the back and welcoming Cora properly to the community. Even Eleanor Davidson offered stiff congratulations, though she couldn't resist adding, I suppose it's fitting. You're both rather outside the usual way of things. Yes, Cora agreed pleasantly.
We are.
Later, much later. They walked home through cold starlight. Cora's feet hurt from dancing, her face ached from smiling, but she felt light as air. We're engaged, she said, testing the words. We are. Silas caught her hand, spinning her in the empty road. Having second thoughts? Never, though you might. Once you realize you've pledged yourself to a woman who slaps rude men in public. I've pledged myself to a woman who stands up for herself and what she loves, he corrected. That's different. That's wonderful. They reached the cabin. Their cabin. Soon to be their married home. Inside. Silas built up the fire while Cora made tea, moving around each other with practiced ease. When they settled in their chairs by the hearth, the familiar evening ritual felt charged with new meaning. I should write to my aunt, Cora said. She's the only family I have left. She'll be shocked. That you're marrying? That I'm marrying someone who wants me as I am. She smiled, remembering. She always said I'd need to find a man who'd been knocked about by life enough to appreciate strength. I think you qualify. Knocked about and put back together. Silas agreed. Seems fitting we'd find each other. They read for a while, but Cora couldn't focus on the words. Her mind kept spinning forward to a wedding where she wouldn't have to shrink, to a marriage where she could be fully herself, to a life built on truth rather than pretense. You're thinking loud again, Silas observed. Happy thoughts this time. She set aside her book. We really did it. Didn't we? Stood up in front of everyone and claimed each other. Was there ever any doubt? She considered. Yes, right up until I slapped William. Then something shifted. I stopped being afraid of what people thought and started protecting what mattered. And what matters? You, us, this life we're building. She stood, crossed to his chair, bent to kiss him softly. The right to be ourselves, together. His arms came around her, holding her close. Forever. Forever. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside was warmth and light, and the promise of all the days to come. Cora Hale, soon to be Cora McCade, had found her place at last. Not just in Larkspur Hollow, not just in Silas's arms, but in her own skin. She was too tall, too strong, too much for the usual-sized world, and that, she knew now, was exactly right. The April storm struck without warning, turning the world white just when the first green shoots had dared to emerge. Cora woke to howling wind and Silas's empty side of the bed, still warm but abandoned.
Silas?
She wrapped herself in a shawl, padded to the main room, empty. His coat was gone from the hook, his boots from beside the door. Through the window, she could barely see 10 feet through the driving snow. This wasn't like the gentle falls of winter. This was nature in fury, the kind of storm that killed cattle and buried unwary travelers. And Silas was out in it. She dressed quickly, layering wool over wool, trying not to think about his still healing ribs, the slight limp he tried to hide on cold mornings. Where would he have gone? The animals were secure. She'd helped him check them last night. Then she remembered the Hendricks family, 5 miles up the mountain. Their youngest had been sick, and Silas had promised to check on them. Storm or no storm. Stubborn fool, she muttered. But her hands shook as she lit the lamps. She couldn't go after him. She didn't know the mountain paths well enough. Would only become another person needing rescue. All she could do was wait, tend the fire, and pray. The morning crawled by. She tried to work mending, cooking, anything to occupy her hands, but kept returning to the window. The storm showed no signs of breaking. If anything, it worsened. Snow driving horizontal, piling against the cabin walls. By noon, fear had crystallized into something sharp and desperate. She'd waited once before for her mother to recover, for her father to stop coughing, for William to be the man he'd promised. Waiting had brought nothing but loss. Not this time. She was pulling on her heaviest boots when the door burst open. Tom Garrett stumbled in, covered in snow, face red with exertion. "Miss Cora, thank God, we need you." Her heart stopped. "Silas." "At Doc Pearson's. He made it down with the Hendricks boy kid, was burning with fever but collapsed soon as he handed him over. Doc says—" Tom stopped, swallowed. "Doc says to come quick." The trip to town was a blur of stinging snow, and Tom's steady stream of chatter meant to distract. Silas got them all down, whole Hendricks family. Path was near invisible, but he knew it by feel. Always did have mountain sense. Course, carrying a sick child through a blizzard when you're still healing yourself. Cora bit back words that wouldn't help. Anger at his stubbornness. Fear at what she'd find. Love so fierce it felt like drowning. Doc Pearson's house was crowded with concerned faces. Martha Stewart met them at the door, caught Cora's hands. "He's asking for you," she said quietly. "Been saying your name over and over." Cora pushed through to the back room, where Silas lay still as death on Doc's examination table. His lips were blue with cold, his breathing shallow. Doc Pearson looked up from checking his pulse, face grim. Exhaustion, cold exposure, and he's torn something inside the ribs. Maybe worse. I've done what I can, but... He trailed off, the rest clear in his eyes. "No." Cora moved to the table, took Silas's frozen hands in hers. "You don't get to leave me. Do you hear we're getting married? We have plans." His eyelids fluttered. "Cora." "I'm here. I'm right here. The boy, little James." "He's fine. You saved him. You saved them all." Tears ran hot down her face. "Now you need to save yourself. For me, please." He squeezed her hands weakly, tired. "I know, but you can't sleep yet. Talk to me. Tell me about our wedding. Tell me about the house we'll build. Tell me—" "Love you," he whispered. "Wanted more time." "Then take it," she said fiercely. "Fight for it. Fight for us." The room fell silent except for his labored breathing. Cora bent close, speaking low and urgent, pouring her strength into him through words and touch. She told him about the children they'd have, tall and strong and unafraid, about the years they'd spend reading by the fire, about growing old together. Two tall trees that had weathered every storm. "Don't you dare make me face this world alone again," she whispered. "I've been alone enough for 2 lifetimes. You promised me forever. Silas McCade, I'm holding you to it." Hours passed. The storm raged. People came and went, bringing soup Cora couldn't eat, whispers she didn't hear. Her world had narrowed to Silas's face, his hands in hers, the rise and fall of his chest. Near midnight, his breathing changed, deeper, steadier. Color crept back into his face, and when his eyes opened, they were clear. "Cora, I'm here." She was crying again, but smiling through it. "I'm here, my love." "Did I miss our wedding?" She laughed, broken but real. "Not yet, though if you pull another stunt like this, I'm marrying you from your sickbed just to make sure you can't escape." He managed a weak smile. "Noted. No more heroics without permission." "Damn right." Doc Pearson, who'd been hovering, moved in to check vitals. "Well, looks like you're too stubborn to die after all." McCade had a reason to stay, Silas said, eyes never leaving Cora's face. The crisis had passed, but recovery was slow. This time, Cora didn't hesitate to take charge. She commandeered Doc's spare room, refusing to move Silas until he was stronger. She slept in a chair by his bed, fed him broth spoon by spoon, read until her voice went hoarse, and the town rallied around them. Tom Garrett organized the men to handle Silas's contracts again. Agnes brought food daily. Martha Stewart stationed herself like a guardian dragon, turning away gawkers and managing the stream of well-wishers. Even Eleanor Davidson sent a pie, though she couldn't resist noting it was for strength, since some people insist on risking themselves unnecessarily. "She's got a point," Cora said, feeding Silas a bite of surprisingly good apple filling. "The Hendricks boy would have died," Silas said quietly. "His fever was so high. Another hour." "I know." She set down the plate, took his face in her hands. "I know why you did it. I love that you did it, but I need you to understand something. You matter too. Your life matters. To me, to this town, to the life we're building. You don't get to throw it away, not even for noble reasons." He covered her hands with his. "I'm sorry. I didn't think—" "No, you didn't, because you've spent so long taking care of others. You've forgotten you deserve care too." She kissed him softly. "That's my job now, partners. Remember, that means we both matter equally." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and she heard the promise in it. The Hendricks family visited when Silas was strong enough to sit up. Little James, recovered and energetic, chattered about the scary trip down the mountain, how Mr. McCade had wrapped him in his own coat and never once stumbled despite the wind. "He's our hero, Mrs., Hendricks said, tears in her eyes. "We owe him everything." "He's our hero too," Cora said simply. "That's why we're keeping him." As April warmed into May, Silas grew stronger. They returned to the cabin, fell back into routine, but something fundamental had shifted. The casual touches became more frequent, the evening conversations deeper. They were learning each other's edges, the places where fear lived, where strength grew. One evening, as they sat reading, Silas set aside his book. "I've been thinking about what you said, about mattering equally." Cora looked up. "And—" "You were right. I've been so focused on earning my place through work. Through helping others, I forgot that sometimes just being is enough." He paused. "My mother used to say that we don't have to earn love, just receive it. I never understood until now. Until now. Until you—" He stood, crossed to her chair, knelt despite her protest about his still tender ribs. "You stayed through the worst of it, twice now. Not because you owed me or needed shelter, but because I love you," she finished. "Because you're mine and I'm yours, and that's how it works." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring, simple gold with a small sapphire. It was my mother's. I've been waiting for the right moment, but I realized there's no perfect moment. There's just us, choosing each other over and over. He looked up at her. Marry me, Cora, soon, before summer, before another storm, before.
Yes,
She slipped from the chair to kneel with him, eye to eye.
yes to soon, yes to forever, yes to all of it.
He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly.
Of course it did.
His tall mother's ring for his tall bride. Sometimes the universe got things exactly right. They stayed there on the floor, holding each other, making plans. A June wedding, a party the whole town could attend, a life built on partnership, not just survival.
No more heroics without consulting me,
Cora said firmly. Same goes for you. No more facing Williams or anyone else alone. Agreed. She kissed him.
We're a team now.
The tallest team in Colorado, he said with a grin.
And the strongest, she added.
Outside, the last of the snow melted into the eager ground, and spring bloomed fierce and bright. Inside, two people who'd thought themselves too much for the world discovered they were exactly enough for each other. The storms would come again, they always did in the mountains. But Cora and Silas would weather them together, neither having to stand alone again. And that, they knew, made all the difference. Martha Stewart, visiting the next day to discuss wedding plans, found them dancing in the kitchen to no music but their own humming. She watched for a moment, these two tall trees swaying together, then smiled and backed away quietly. Some things were too perfect to interrupt, and love, real love, deserved its moments of unwitnessed joy. June arrived, dressed in wildflowers and warm breezes, painting the mountains in colors Cora had never seen in Ohio. The cabin hummed with preparation, her wedding dress hung from the rafters, still needing final touches, and every surface held lists and plans and small tokens of the town's excitement. But this evening was quiet. Just her and Silas on the porch they'd built together that spring, watching sunset turn the peaks to gold. Tomorrow would bring guests and ceremony, vows spoken before the whole town. Tonight was theirs alone. Nervous? Silas asked, his hand finding hers on the worn wood between their chairs. No, Cora said, surprising herself with the truth of it.
For the first time in my life, I'm not nervous about being seen.
He squeezed her fingers. Good, though I'd marry you in the middle of a blizzard with no one watching if that's what you wanted. I know, that's why I want everyone there. She turned to face him, this man who'd become her whole world. I spent so long hiding, shrinking, apologizing for my existence. Tomorrow, I want to stand tall in front of everyone and choose you. Publicly, proudly. My brave Cora, he murmured. Not brave, just finally myself. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged one by one. Inside, everything waited her dress, his new shirt that actually fit his broad shoulders, the rings Tom Garrett had brought from Denver. But out here was peace, the kind that came from being completely known and completely accepted. Cora, Silas said eventually, voice thoughtful. If you could tell yourself a year ago one thing, what would it be? She considered a year ago. She'd been in Ohio, still reeling from William's rejection, working herself to exhaustion at the Henderson farm, never imagining that a train ride west would change everything. That being saved from that train car was just the beginning, she said finally. That the real saving would come slower. Through kindness and patience and learning, I deserved both. And now I know my first night of feeling truly safe wasn't about locks on doors or distance from danger. It was the first night I believed someone could see all of me and not wish me smaller. He stood, drew her up with him, into his arms. They fit together perfectly, her head at just the right height to rest against his shoulder, his chin atop her hair. Dance with me, he said softly. There's no music. Listen closer. And she did, heard the evening birds settling, the whisper of pine boughs,
the steady beat of his heart against hers. Mountain music, as real as any fiddle. They swayed together on the porch they'd built, under stars that had witnessed her arrival as a frightened woman and would tomorrow witness her joy as a bride. She thought of all the first nights of fear, of pain, of slowly dawning hope. Tomorrow would be another first, the first night of the rest of their lives. "I have something for you," Silas said when they finally stopped moving. "A wedding gift, though maybe it's more a promise." He led her inside, to his desk where papers lay waiting, legal documents, she saw, properly witnessed and sealed. "The deed to the cabin," he explained. "Changed to both our names, equal ownership, equal say. This is your home, Cora. Not because I'm giving it to you, but because you've made it one. I'm just making it official." Tears pricked her eyes. Such a simple thing, but it meant everything. Not just shelter given, but partnership acknowledged. "I have something for you too," she said, moving to the trunk that held her few possessions. From the bottom, wrapped in cloth, she pulled a watch. "It was my father's, the only valuable thing I kept when I left. I want you to have it." He took it reverently, opened the cover to reveal the photograph tucked inside her parents on their wedding day. Her mother tall and proud beside her shorter father, both glowing with happiness. "They loved each other," Cora said quietly. "Despite what the world said about their difference in height, my mother never made herself smaller for him, and he never asked her to." She met Silas's eyes. "I want us to be like them, different from what the world expects, but right for each other." "We already are," he said, and kissed her. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself had decided to celebrate. Cora woke early, too excited to sleep longer, and found Silas already gone tradition demanding they not see each other before the ceremony. Martha Stewart arrived with Agnes and several other women, transforming the cabin into a whirlwind of preparation. They helped Cora into her dress blue as the mountain sky, cut to flatter rather than hide her height. Her mother's pearl combs held her hair, and around her neck hung a new gift, a delicate gold chain Silas had left with Martha to give her. "You look beautiful," Agnes said, stepping back to admire. "Like you were meant to be exactly as you are." "I was," Cora said simply. "It just took me a while to believe it." The church was full when they arrived. It seemed the entire town had come, dressed in their finest, faces bright with genuine pleasure. Cora had worried she'd feel like a spectacle, but instead felt embraced. These people had watched her story unfold, had supported and defended and welcomed. They weren't here to gawk, but to celebrate. Tom Garrett, acting as usher with excessive enthusiasm, led her to the church door. Silas is already inside, looking nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Never seen him fidget so much. "He's fidgeting. Like a schoolboy, it's right endearing." Tom winked. Ready to put him out of his misery, she was. The doors opened, and there was Silas at the altar, tall and strong in his new shirt, hair carefully combed but already escaping to curl at his collar. When he saw her, his face transformed with such joy that her eyes burned with happy tears. She walked toward him with measured steps, head high, bouquet of mountain wildflowers steady in her hands. No music needed, the rustle of fabric and collective held breath was symphony enough. When she reached him, he took her hands, and she saw her own wonder reflected in his storm-gray eyes. "You came," he whispered. "Where else would I be?" Pastor Williams cleared his throat, beginning the ceremony. But Cora barely heard the words. Her whole focus was on Silas, on the promises they made, on the rings they exchanged. When asked if she would take this man, her yes rang clear as a bell. His was quieter but no less certain. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams concluded with a smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Silas, you may kiss your bride." He did, thorough and tender, and the church erupted in cheers. When they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. McCade, Cora felt something settle in her chest. Not just happiness, but belonging. Roots, deep and strong. The reception spilled out of the church hall into the street. Tables groaned under food contributed by everyone. Music flowed from instruments that appeared like magic, and laughter rang against the mountains. Cora danced with Silas, with Tom, with Doc Pearson, who claimed the privilege of age. She even danced with Marshall Hendricks, who solemnly promised to run off any more ex-fiancés who might appear. "Though I don't think that'll be a problem," he added with a grin. "Way Silas looks at you, any fool can see you're properly claimed." Late in the evening, when the celebrations had mellowed to quiet conversations and tired children sleeping in their parents' arms, Cora found herself on the church steps with Silas. The sun was setting again, painting their wedding day in gold and rose. "No regrets?" he asked. "Only one," she said, and felt him tense. "I wish we'd met sooner. Think of all the years we could have had." He relaxed, laughed. "Then we'd have missed the journey, the becoming. I wasn't ready for you sooner. Cora had to learn some things first. Such as that love isn't about finding someone who makes you feel less broken. It's about finding someone who sees your cracks and thinks they're beautiful. Who knows you're strong not despite them, but because of them." She leaned into him, this man who spoke poetry without meaning to. "When did you get so wise?" "About the time a too-tall woman fell off a train and into my life." They watched their friends and neighbors, their new family, celebrating in the street. Tomorrow would bring normal life again, work and weather, challenges and changes. But tonight was perfect. "Ready to go home, Mrs. McCade?" Silas asked eventually. "I am home," Cora said, and meant it. They walked back to their cabin hand in hand, followed by good-natured catcalls and thrown flowers. At the door, Silas swept her into his arms, carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests about tradition and his still-healing ribs. Inside, lamplight welcomed them. Their books waited on the shelves, their chairs by the fire, their life spread before them like a map of possibility. Cora moved through the space, touching familiar objects that somehow looked different now. Not his or hers, but theirs. "My first night as your wife," she said softly. "First of thousands," Silas promised, drawing her close. She thought of that terrified girl on the train. Sure, she was too much for any life to hold. How wrong she'd been. She wasn't too much, she was exactly enough for this life, this man, this love that asked her to be nothing but herself. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For seeing me, the real me, and thinking she was worth saving." He pulled back to look at her, hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Oh, my dear, brave Cora. Don't you know you saved yourself? I just gave you a safe place to do it." And there, in the cabin that had become a home, with the man who'd become her heart, Cora Ellen Hale McCade finally understood. She'd spent so long looking for someone to make her feel like she fit in the world. But the truth was simpler and more powerful. She'd learned to fit in her own skin first. The rest had followed. They stood together in the lamplight, tall and strong and complete, writing the first words of their new story. And somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the mountains, not a sound of leaving anymore, but of journeys completed and new ones beginning. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what touched your heart in Cora and Silas's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a thumbs up and hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of love and courage in the American frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.